Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Solar Tech Talk podcast from BayWa RE. BayWa RE is a leading solar and storage distributor here in the U.S. I'm your host, Marketing Communications Coordinator Brian Church. Today, I am joined by our VP of Product Strategy, David Dunlap, as well as the CEO of American Solar and Roofing, Joy Seitz. Today, we're going to be talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill. This is kind of surrounding the solar industry at every angle over the last week and honestly the last few months. So I'd like to start off by saying, whereas we are experts in solar, we are not tax experts, we're not lawyers, we are not financial advisors. We are just people who are figuring it out together with everybody else. So welcome, Joy. Welcome, David. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I'm really excited to hear your opinions and as we break down this new bill. So I'm guessing you haven't had time to read the entire 900-page One Big Beautiful Bill at this point. However, there's been a lot of anticipation, a lot of rewriting, a lot of uncertainty leading up to this. So while the bill affects different aspects of American life, there are extreme changes to the tax credits in the solar energy industry. During this podcast, we're going to kind of talk about it from all angles: residential, commercial, storage, domestic content, even. So, going back and looking at the last few months, there's been a lot of talk and saying that this is going to kill solar. Solar is going to be over. The industry is dead, but the iterations of this bill may have been worse. It has gotten slightly better, but it's still pretty safe to say that this is a big setback for the industry. Is that correct?
I'll start with that and definitely want to hear your take on it, Joy. My belief is this is a setback, and it is going to change the way that we bring deployed solar to the American market. But it definitely doesn't kill the industry, right? I think that we like to think of it that way whenever we're faced with big obstacles and big change. And nobody, let's face it, no business really loves to have chaos and uncertainty and massive change. But we have seen some pretty significant challenges in past years, and we have figured out new ways to be relevant in the market. And let's face it, solar is still a good investment to make. It's still the cheapest form of energy generation that we have at our fingertips today, even without subsidies. So we just have to figure out how to reframe some of the ways that we bring that to market and the way that we create value.
Yeah, I would ditto, of course, everything David just said and say from a solar installer point of view in Arizona, who's gone through a net metering battle over 10 years ago. Once you go through some of these battles, you kind of, it does test you as somebody who's committed to the clean energy movement and the clean energy sector, that it does make you have to take a step back and reflect and be like, okay, I have to do the work, I have to roll up my sleeves, and I have to keep going, but I have a conviction around it and I want to do it. And I believe it's still right for my community, for my state, for my region. And that you can break through when these challenges happen. So I don't believe it's dead. I do believe it's a large setback. I do believe, we'll see some folks leave the market, but then new folks will probably enter the market because it is just a business cycle that we will experience.
Yeah, completely. And the word solar coaster is used constantly, and it's very true. There are ups and downs, there has been, and there's always going to be sort of battles at every stage of the way. So that's something I'd really like to ask you about right now is just sort of, I feel like in the last few months, we've seen a lot of sort of bipartisan, advocacy, people coming together, really in the industry and talking to different lawmakers, creating action, creating momentum at every level. So, Joy, what's your experience been like leading up to this bill?
Well, my experience, leading up to just this bill, I would say my experience overall has always been advocacy. So I came into the industry through advocacy and through lobbying efforts. Specifically with this bill, it dropped and we only had months to contend with it, right? And sometimes, in a utility rate case, you might have 18 months, in this situation, you had just months. And so as soon as the initial version started coming out, and even before that, just kind of the rumors that specifically 25D was on the chopping block and nobody was speaking about it, is when my experience was, I mean, it's really what I said. And I started making phone calls to folks like BayWa and other leaders in the industry saying, hey, if you care about this, we need your help, right? This is an all hands on deck, specifically for 25D. And so once the happened and I started rallying the troops, again, if you've not experienced policy work, you kind of hope it just all works out. But my experience told me this one was going to be a hard one, specifically on 25D, but then just the overall industry. And so it was kind of exhausting for a minute, just kind of getting everybody to see it from a different vantage point if they had never seen it and worked in it before. But once I had the traction around that, for me, who likes doing lobbying work, I was lucky that people jumped on board, believed what I was saying, and got to DC and started doing the work. And then once we got to DC, it does get very confusing and convoluted, and you don't really know what the legislators and the Congress folks, their Senate versus the representatives are going to say or do. And you hope they do the right thing and you hope that they hear you. And so it was chaotic. It was nerve-wracking. It was exhausting. It was at the same time, it made me get closer to the people that that I've been partnered with, from manufacturers to distribution, just like BayWa. And I'm optimistic that based upon all of that work, it's going to make those who fought side by side, it's going to make us stronger together.
Joy, could you share any real positive illuminations or encounters that you had with Republican state representatives or senators that kind of, I understood you had some really enlightening conversations with them. They didn't even understand what the jobs impact of this was and how much of good that solar has done to the local contractor base, the jobs creation, and sort of the infrastructure within their states. Can you share some of those highlights on the positive side?
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely. And maybe as a reframe, as a positive side is, we did realize that they didn't really know. And it was an opportunity for me to be talking to even local companies to be like, this is why local action matters, right? And so a handful of times you're talking to their staff, and their staff they're young and they go from subject to subject all day long. And so they were educated on it. The more that we spoke to them, the more they started understanding it, the more that they understood the difference between a local installer that looks like mine versus maybe a regional company that's using a leasing product, right? Those are just two different business models. And so having them kind of understand that, and even there is a positive in knowing that they don't know. Right? Like we still have an uphill battle of telling our story. And if our local, mayors and our local congressmen don't know their local person's story, it is up to our industry and it is up to local companies to come together and start teaching at the local level. Because as we said, this is a solar coaster. There will be another day in which we'll have another bite of the apple. We don't know what those incentives will look like. We don't know what the technology will look like. But there will come a day that the opportunity will arise. And if we're not creating that local connection, it's hard to move it to the federal level. So that would be one. I mean, I definitely know just one specific congressperson was like, I didn't like you to be in the beginning of all of this. And then I kind of started liking you guys. And now I understand why you exist, at the end of the conversation. Right. And so they weren't negative on it, but it was very clear from the get-go that they had every intention of passing that big, beautiful bill, and they had every intention on sticking to President Trump's, campaign promise.
Yeah. And I think that for me was a real important point, because everything you said about advocacy and federal lobbying it's grueling, it's challenging, and there's so many competing interests and how they actually make their decisions, and can you trust them when they sit across the table from you and say, this is important to me, I'm fighting for it. But in those vulnerable moments where they actually share, like you said, I didn't like you at the start of this, but now I understand better. I've interacted with you, I've seen you as a human being, and I've talked to you as a business person. I get it. And then when the next time their staff gives them jobs data, right? Here's what this industry is doing for your constituency, for your state. They kind of do have to pay attention to that. And it did feel to me like this round was a real big win in terms of solar is purple, right? This is not a blue state versus red state thing. And regardless of one's own politics, this is good business. And I think we did make that point, even though we failed on some of the policy objectives, right? And to your point, we failed now. We have failed before. We have won before, and we are probably able to win again.
Right.
So, yeah.
And and again, it's very important to understand that if you want to stay involved in the industry, you have to be in these conversations. That's basically, after this happened federally, I'm like, well, I got to go back to my mayors. I got to go back to my city council. I got to go back, to the counties. I have to go all the way back and start all over again at the local level and be like, okay, how are you all going to maintain these programs? How are you all going to stay committed to not eroding my industry more, right? And so this is, again, if you're in it and you care about it as a business owner, this is very critical to the conversation of your business, which is what makes me be able to have a conversation of what's positive and what can we do moving forward, because I understand the beginning, the middle, and the end. There's data to that. It makes sense to me. I know why it happened, and I know how we can get out of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot of great points there. Like solar, it's always been sort of like a locally grown, business in a lot of ways. It goes from state to state, goes from AHJ to AHJ. But there are these sort of federal programs that are supporting a more widespread adoption of it. So, when these programs go away, they will trickle down immediately. So, getting into 25D a little bit and how it affects local installers. How is the elimination of this tax credit going to affect residential solar energy installers immediately?
Yeah, so Joy, help me out here. I'll kind of give a policy interpretation, and then you tell me the reality, the boots on the ground, from your perspective. So, what's written into the law as passed is the incentive ends at the end of this calendar year. So the 30% ITC homeowner tax credit, that's what we're talking about with 25D, it sunsets. It's done. And there's a definition of expenditures made that relates to how you know that a project fell into tax year 2025 in order to claim the credit versus a project that somehow falls into tax year 2026, wherein that homeowner tax credit is no longer allowed, right? So this is often the case with these policies is how will that get figured out, and what does that language of expenditures mean? There's some debate, and there's some tax attorney sort of discussions and IRS interpretations that go on. But I think, let's be honest, for someone doing a cash or loan project like Joy's business, for a homeowner, the homeowner is the tax liable party. They're the one that's going to put this on their individual personal tax filing, and they have to be able to show that they spent this money in tax year 2025. So what are they going to do to demonstrate that they spent this money in that year? They show their invoice, their final payment made, or a certificate of completion from the installer, or some kind of a loan final funding is my assumption. So Joy, what else is there to figure out, right? I mean, I think the truth is, in order for the homeowner to feel comfortable, and they don't have an army of tax attorneys at their disposal. This is not a business. This is their personal taxes. they want to pay for completed work.
Right.
So they're going to want to say, I paid 100% of this project and the job was done.
Right.
What else do we need to know in terms of the reality of what does completion mean?
For me, there's a yes and, as I know it, and great job of explaining it, is you could pay for it. That is it might not be installed, right? Green light might not be on, PTO may not have happened, but you can pay for it in 2025 and it can actually get completed in 2026. That is how I am reading it. And as I've heard from other folks that are, it's above my pay grade on reading it, but how other folks are reading it and understanding it. And so for a business like mine, if we're just going to drive into like my thought process, I called my lawyer and I was like, okay, I'm thinking about taking people's money in 2025 and not doing anything with it until 2026, right? I'm lucky in the sense that I have a long-term brand. I have a credible brand. I've done, I've done all the work up until this point to have credibility with customers. And so I'm part of my strategy is if I am, because we will be, right, when we get to the end of the year, which for me will probably be September 15th, October 1st, I'll be sold out for the year unless I, deploy another couple crews, which is also on my roadmap. I'll be sold out. And so if I have somebody come to me October 15th after being fully booked for construction in 25, I personally might get on the phone with them and be like, okay, do you want to, put the full money down, by December 31st, and I'll get you, installed by January 31st is a conversation that I'm having with lawyers, with other advisors, with myself on how to build that business. So I might be able to take it into the next year.
Sure. I think that makes sense. And that's a great way to kind of think about it. And then I think there is that, how strong is your trust battery with your clientele, your brand, your reputation? Most homeowners are not lawyers. They don't have attorneys reviewing the contracts they're signing for things like solar. Even when they buy a house, they're relying on their agent to tell them, sign here, it's all fine, right? So obviously this could be exploited, but the reason that it makes sense is because we're creating an avenue for a homeowner to say, I believe, and I have some documentation that I think will hold up a reasonable amount of scrutiny, to say you will complete this work even though I didn't pay you in full, or I did pay you in full prior to finishing the rate. But for context, there are two things that I wanted to just sort of clarify for our listeners, that I think are really important if other business owners are not thinking about this the way you are. And I really appreciate that you brought them up. One is that what your time from contract signing to install completion is. That's your construction timeline. And you're very aware of when you're going to have a different conversation with a homeowner. You don't have until December 30th to sell new jobs, right? You've got to back that up. And it's going to be different for different installers in different markets. Some have a 6-month turnaround time, some may be as short as 4 weeks or something like that. But so that's the first piece of advice, right? Is know your business, know when you can complete. Are you willing to bring on additional crews and do twice the volume? Be honest about that, right? And what you're going to do with it. And then be honest with what you're doing with that money. If you take that money in advance, it's like what the trouble that some people got into with early payment disbursements from financial products, right? They were using that to fund their growth, not banking it in essence in an escrow for job completions. And then they weren't able to pay their equipment bill. So you're talking about taking the money in advance, but if you're going to do the project in 26, I mean, let's be honest, you're not going to buy that product from BayWa until you need it in 2026. And so you're going to need to have the money later to pay for that. And you don't have any more collection from that customer that you get to make.
Right.
So
Yeah. It's
being
definitely
crystal clear about your P&L, and really owning that if you make that business decision.
Yeah. It goes into, in my mindset, it would go into a different account. It's going into a fully different bank account. It's going onto my QuickBooks completely different. And I might buy the equipment, right? Like, who's to say I wouldn't buy the equipment and put it in their garage if they, if that makes them feel a little more solid, right?
Sure.
So there again, it's all, and again, or I read the language wrong. We all read the language wrong, and I can't do it, and that's not going to happen. But there are different ways to get up the mountain, and the faster we're having conversations like this with our partners, right? The more we can get out of it, and that's why I appreciate BayWa and the partnerships that I've created along the way to be like, is this what you're hearing? And we're like, yeah, I think that's possible, right? Do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of contextualize a little bit because Brian's going to take us down a few of the other policy pieces. But before we leave 25D, I think you and I are very clear. This is about cash and loan business because it's homeowner tax credit validation, right? So homeowners are not businesses, so they don't get access to the domestic content adder. They don't have PPA and third-party owned lease vehicles. So none of that matters. And our interpretation of the language in the bill around foreign entities of concern is all tied to federal dollars, which if we're just really literal about that, 25D goes away. There are no more federal dollars available to a homeowner. So then that's it, right? We're just simply talking about small businesses being willing to service direct homeowners. I can only offer you this incentive from the federal government on your taxes up to this point, and whatever that pipeline and funnel and capacity and workarounds and then that's it. And so then the conversation turns to, and that's what we need to be preparing for, is in a post OBBB world where the homeowner doesn't have that 30% federal rebate, there is still in some states a state credit. New Mexico has a 10% one, and others do. You mentioned city and county, maybe there are some new ones. Those might still be on the table, but at the end of the day, it's now we've got a different set of economic conditions or comfort level to bridge in terms of making that investment in solar, right? And I think that it still makes sense for a lot of people to buy their future power requirements at today's pricing. I build a generation plant, I'm making my own electricity, and it's going to be at that cost of setup and maintenance for the life of the system. So we are able to lock in their future utility spend essentially by how much of that overall consumption need that I will have in the future, I can generate myself. So we're back to fundamentals, right? Around just what size system offsets my consumption optimally, and how do I hold on to that power and not give it back to the grid, which you guys in Arizona dealt with 10 years ago, right? Don't give it back to the grid.
Right.
As much as possible, because you're not getting any economic benefit from it.
Right. For
so
us,
don't oversize the system.
Yeah, for us, it's like we're going back to 2005 as a business, where we had no net metering and no federal support. So as a company, and we started in 2001. So for us, it's just, well, dust that off and go back to that.
Right. And we've got a different cost stack than we had then. Equipment is cheaper, soft costs, there's a whole piece, and maybe now's not where we want to drill into that. But I think that's what you will be facing, right? Is how do I optimize my cost stack for the homeowner to make it as attractive as possible and still maintain working business margins that you need to.
Costs have gone down, utility rates have gone up, and solar is, more accepted, right? So there's a lot more people that, while we're still an early adopter, phase of this, there's just a lot more, at least in my community, in my state, of people who have solar and it's working. So, and there's a lot of people who I had a conversation with somebody who's like, oh, does the tax credit even still exist? They thought it went away a long time ago. So I would also say people who haven't really thought about solar, they might not even know that a tax credit was available to them 2 years ago, or a year. Like once we start moving into 26 and 27, like we can't be like, ho hum, we don't have it, right? Like, that we don't have it, but the homeowner might not have ever known that was available. They might have heard whispers around a tax credit, but again, in the sales pipeline process, right, you just are like, yeah, it was something, but like, guess what, solar's still viable, and you move on, right? We can't commiserate with our customers that don't really know what's going on, in the future. We do have to pivot our conversation sooner rather than later.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that's great. It's awesome to hear that, solar's still cost effective without subsidies. Obviously, it's going to depend on the market, but like you said, it's just kind of a shift in the conversation. So, with that, and knowing that commercial tax credits kind of operate on a different level, there's the 48E solar tax credit for businesses. So, these would affect solar leases, solar leasing programs, and if these tax credits still exist, are you, Joy, shifting your business model at all to start offering residential solar leasing programs? Is this going to be like in comparison to an ownership and a cash model, or what sort of scenario is going to be necessary in order for these like solar leases to be viable for small companies?
Yeah. Well, this is where I'll put on my visionary hat and um and think about and consider and blow up phones and be like, hey, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? For me, the leasing model does have to look different. And so there are conversations that I'm having. Again, this is very visionary, thought process, but the model just has to be different. The ownership has to come sooner. It has to be more advantageous for the homeowner. I stopped offering leases almost a decade ago, and so that's my answer. Like, that's my short answer of like the business model of leasing and the commitment to the leasing and the commitment to the customer from those financing entities just has to look different and be more customer centric for me to take that product into my company. I'm not opposed to it if it is if it is customer specific and it's much more focused on doing it the right way and really caring about the customer equally.
I love that answer, and yeah, that's true for me as well. I'm willing to admit when I first started, lease was sort of rearing its head as the big opportunity, and it felt like a threat at the time, because I kind of didn't trust that it had the customer's best interest in mind, right? And I think, why is that? Certainly my original bias was, as a customer, as a homeowner, I would want to own my system because I understand that long-term benefit. But I have the same attitude about cars. I don't want to lease a car, but I do understand why people do lease a car, right? There's a baseline expense that they want to have for their transportation, and they always want to have a new vehicle and not worry about maintenance, and they are happy to change the vehicle regularly. Okay, on a monthly basis, a lease is not an unreasonable way to afford a vehicle. And I think that we have seen a greater adoption of solar in parts of the market where cash and loan is actually not available, right? People don't have the means. And to your point, Joe, I think the real key here is, how do we make it customer centric, customer focused? So if it is a viable model, it has to be viable because it's adding value, not because somebody's getting rich off of it. That, to me, that's not part of the viability of it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we I think need to see how that plays out differently. But going back a step, like, let's think about what the original IRA law around the 48E was intended to do, right? This was a commercial tax credit for businesses, and it kind of got co-opted to the residential lease model because there were businesses owning those assets. And they sort of looked at it as, here's an opportunity to make that tax credit apply to residential installs, but not for the benefit of that homeowner. In theory, it could have, right? Whatever those additional savings are from the credit are passed on in the form of a lower lease price, and some of that was. But then, commissions and sales practices and other soft costs is where we kind of lost our way, I think. And so, I think the overall story here has to be, we reduce the the cost stack. We create some transparency in our industry around truth in lending, right? We disclose what we're charging and why, so the homeowners can have confidence and they feel like they're getting a fair value. And it's not just that we're towing the line of the law, but we're doing it with that integrity sort of standpoint. I think for me, that's what's critically important. On the commercial side, I think this is interesting because I do think that businesses like yours are going to need to look at small and medium C&I work, because we know the residential will contract, right? We just know that the volume of business available there is, like you said, is going to go back to 2005 levels. There was not a huge adoption rate. Not everybody has those means. Not everybody is going to have access to the capital. So, so within the commercial realm, I think all of the same applies, but we're not talking about a lease model. We're talking about just the commercial entity being able to take advantage of the rebate however they want, and what is the funding that makes sense for them, right? Where do you sit today in terms of, like, I know you're kind of looking into commercial more, but how are you feeling about that? How do I recommend, advise, or ask where's the funding going to come from, and what's the right answer for that business owner?
Yeah, so I started looking into American did commercial like before the 2008 boom and bust, 2008, 2009. And then for the last 10, 15 years, we've been really focused on residential. And then before all this hoopla started happening, I started planning about 2 years ago to get into commercial. The first opportunities for me in commercial was all in O&M. And so I have now done more O&M commercial than ever before. And so now I will be going into that commercial space just based upon, again, and I'll look to you to have that conversation of like, when do I have to start the work? When do they when does it need to be completed by? How does the business take that tax credit? So those are the things that I'm still just finalizing in my mind to be able to start going back out to those businesses that are wanting to invest in solar and educating them, educating their board. I was working to start building some nonprofits. Now they're being impacted, but how are we going to help businesses and nonprofits in our community save money through solar before it all ends? So all of that was being built upon. And again, another shout out to BayWa, just like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and the resources that you all provide and support you provide as as I go back into that market 10 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And so, yeah, we'll journey that together and figure it out. But I do think that the key is going to be understanding the funding source, where the business owner sits, who is actually the tax entity, and what do they want to leverage. And so to your point, yeah, we're going to have to come armed, ready to educate them, because if they're doing solar, it's probably for the first time. They probably have, this might be their only business, or maybe they own a franchise and they own many businesses, but there's a good chance they don't know the right questions to ask. And so we're there to consult and give them those opportunities. But we have to be clear on what we would consider to be an advantage for them versus a massive obstacle. And I think that's one of the interesting things that I'm seeing right now in the difference of how funding is deployed, cash and loan, very much like the homeowner conversation we were having. You're going to pay for this project, you're going to sign a contract, you're going to get construction done, and you're not going to pay it off in full until you've done the punch list and you've got the PTO and you've got solar energy generating, right? I mean, as a buyer of a service, as a contractor, you want to complete the job in order to get your final payment. And most people assume I'm not making my final payment until the job is done. This whole idea that we can safe harbor product, or set it aside, or commit to putting an inverter on a roof now and then not come back for 2 years is kind of nuts. Like, that we shouldn't be thinking about those business models. I don't think that seems kind of crazy. And what business owner wants to commit to something like that? But if we understand how they're going to leverage that tax credit, because it's their obligation, not yours as the installer, we want to steer them on the right path, right? How do you
Do they have to
maximize your investment?
commence? Is it like they have to commence by a certain date? Meaning, do I have to start my project by a certain date in 2026 for them to even be able to get it by 2027?
Right now, that I think is the wording. But again, we're in this zone of getting a whole bunch of people interpreting it and
Okay.
testing theories and saying, is that true? Is it true in all cases? Is it true for avoiding the FEOC concerns? Is it, this, that, and the other? And I think we, as an industry, we oftentimes conflate all the different things into one question. And we say, what does commencement mean? Well,
Right.
Commencement about what? Like which channel,
Right.
which lane are we in when we're talking about this? And let's isolate and talk through that. Because I think my read on it is every one of those conditions is going to have a slightly different answer.
And when do you
so it's not going to be
think,
quite as simple.
well, I'll stay with FEOC. And then was there any cleaning up of that? Or would you also say that even FEOC is still being, which is foreign entity concern, right?
Yeah.
Of concern. Basically, did you get anything from China? But did any of that get cleaned up in the final bill, or is the industry, or is there still a lot of confusion that's being read and we're waiting for guidance?
It's been cleaned up in the sense that it was tied more to the start of the project than the completion. And I think that's then been conflated with, well, what does it mean to start, and can you safe harbor product, right? So there is some discussion around safe harbor now through the end of the year. Potentially, that's work you could do after the expiration of the ramp down, and so you're basically securing your 2028 and 2029 pipeline of business at today's rates. And then there's the beat the FEOC concern, which you would have had to start before a date that, then that project is exempt from the FEOC language. But at the end of the day, I think the administration is trying to tighten up on that, and the executive order from this morning was specifically tasking Treasury to close the loophole on that and say, we don't want this money going to China. We don't want these loopholes to exist. So let's shut it down, right? And as I think about that, I have to think about what are we doing to ourselves as an industry when we say, let's grab a whole bunch of product and a whole bunch of money out of the industry in the next 6 months that's preserving work and a pipeline of installations for the next 4 years. That doesn't make sense. What PV manufacturer wants to produce 4 years worth of inventory in 6 months and then have their lines sit idle for the next 4 years? That doesn't make sense. Like, why would we do that as an industry? And we've gone through this up and down in the past with a whole bunch of product gets taken out of the channel. We have massive constraint. Then they don't install it as fast as they thought, and they start to run out of cash. So then they have to liquidate their inventory and sacrifice some of the backlog that they thought they would build in order to raise cash. So now they're dumping inventory into the channel and creating a glut and a price drop, right? We did that to ourselves.
Right. And
like, why did we think that was a good idea?
Is that specifically in when you're talking about safe harboring?
Yes.
Like just buying it all. So when you're talking about buying it for the next 6 months so you can install it in the next 4 years, that's all safe harboring. And then
that's safe harboring. And my understanding is that that's not only a lease sort of an option. What it is a commercial tax entities opportunity. So you do see safe harboring in utility scale, and you do see it in the large industrial as well, right? It's let's make a tax filing that this project has commenced. Let's demonstrate that we've met the minimum for commencement, which currently is only 5% of the cost has been spent. And you are in possession of those goods within 110, 120 days, something like that, right? So you make an investment, you file, and this is the hard work that if you're not a commercial tax entity doing these filings, we have no idea. I have no idea, but I assume it's a mountain of paperwork because you're
Right.
basically going on record of saying, I'm committing to these 1,000 projects into the future. Or if you're utility scale, I've got these 5 projects that I've booked for advanced years, but I've done something to meet the Treasury requirement for initiating those projects, so I can lock them into today's policies and
Yeah.
today's incentives. That's in a nutshell, that's what safe harboring is. And so
Right.
it's all about which product can you buy that covers enough cost to count for 5% and that has a long shelf life. And the risks of that are the market price changes dramatically, right? You buy your modules at, I don't know, make up a number, 40 cents a watt today. And in 2 years, you go to install them and they're only worth 20 cents a watt.
Right.
Was that a smart move?
I've done that
I don't
before.
know, maybe.
That was a fun lesson I learned. And so then a company like mine who does residential and commercial isn't probably working in the safe harboring standpoint unless I randomly have a big business that has multiple buildings that wants to buy something, right? And they just want to, they understand it very well, and the game you're playing and the moves you're making and on the chessboard to be able to do it.
That's my belief, yes. And,
Okay.
and I think it would pretty much be exclusive to a commercial entity that understands how they go on record for having commenced construction for that project and made that bill. So they would tell you, go and buy me my modules and ship them to this address by this date. And they're taking on 100% of that liability for that tax credit filing, because that's theirs to make, right? And it's up to them to put it on record. And then their contract with you is just, you have to have it finished by X date, because that's the deadline I've given to myself, or that's the extent of what I think I can get away with in the time frame.
And so with the 4080 for the business model I have, how long do I have to get it installed by? Is that by the 2027, December 31st?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on if you're locking it in at today's rates, then it really is. And yeah, you and I haven't read all 900 pages, right. So I'm not going to get it right. But there is some sort of a deadline for those to be good for, and I think that it's different. But in a practical sense, most people are thinking about the first deadline is end of 27 and the second deadline is end of 29.
Okay.
It's confusing because the ramp down of the incentives is independent of the safe harbor thing. So you're talking about new originations, new projects in tax year 2026, tax year 2027, right? Those have those future rates at play, but you could still play the same game of safe harboring under those future rules. What everyone's trying to do right now is say, how far out can I get on this, because I want the maximum benefit of it. I don't want a 20% of the 30% benefit, right? I want the full 30%.
Yeah.
So and then as it ramps down, that's the difference.
So then I remember when the IRA passed, how long we were waiting for guidance from the government on like how to use the IRA. Would you say that we're in that same situation then as an industry, that there are things that we're going to need guidance on, especially, I suppose, since President Trump put out the executive order on the 7th.
I think he's trying to accelerate that piece of it so that that's not a gray area and people can't make up their own interpretations. And that's part of the discussion that's happening right now in the business, right? Is people trying to poke at that and say, well, is this going to change existing safe harbor agreements and existing purchases and commitments already made? Or is it going to take place for new agreements made after guidance is published? Or, every one of these rounds has to deal with that and they have to confront it. And what we saw around the Treasury guidance for the domestic content and the tribal lands and the nonprofit and other things, each iteration, they said, as of this guidance, here's what we're going to say about stuff that was put in motion prior and put in motion after. And it all is tied to some definition of how do you tie a project to a date. And the easiest convenient thing is either the start date or the end date. But like anything in the middle is really hard to prove. So they're looking for an easy way to say, here's the proof I require for a date of commencement or a date of completion, and you have to have that within this time frame in order to say it applies to the old guidance applies or the new guidance applies. And most often it's new origination, new contracts, because if people did start a project and they did it under a certain set of rules, that's much more disruptive to change the rules middle of the way, right? That contract you signed is now worthless because we changed the rules on you, right? Doesn't mean that people won't push for that, but right, that's the fallout. That's the concern.
And then moving to, again, like more of a business model looks like mine, have you gotten any understanding around the direct pay for nonprofits? Did that stay in play for them?
That's a great question. And no, I don't have an answer on that. Okay. I don't think there was a lot of distinction within 48E. So 48E has all of those different sort of adders or extra pieces or different qualifications. And so, I and my team have not called out direct pay and nonprofits specifically. So I'm guessing that there isn't really specific language in there about it. So it may all come back to that push for Treasury to clarify, are these rules under the current guidance still fine and they apply and it doesn't change anything, or do they want to pull it back? At the end of the day, I think the logical or rational justification of all of this is we want federal money to go to American projects made with American products and American brands. We don't want to be exploited by China and extracting America's wealth off to China, right? Fundamentally, I think we can safely say that's at the core of this. Doesn't mean that everything was done with a lot of precision and clear policy control, but I think that it is fair to say, if we think about it through that lens, then any sort of workarounds or loopholes that are designed to allow money to bleed out or to take too long to get turned into projects or whatever, kind of is not what the lawmakers were hoping for. Mm-hmm. They want this, trying to stay apolitical here. The goal is federal funding should go to American projects, right? And it's American projects that actually get built.
Right.
That's what's desired here. And then there's how much is solar worth compared to other forms of energy and those kinds of things. And, I think it is true that we didn't want these incentives to go away, but we did get to a point where we're more capable of standing on our own without the subsidies than we used to be, certainly.
Right.
And then I think we've got an impatience around getting there with the domestic manufacturing. We definitely don't have the supply chain in the US to support our full-size industry. That we knew that, and we know it's going to take the better part of a decade to get there if that's the ultimate goal. So forcing the issue is going to cause some pain and constraints in the near term.
Yeah, and I think what I would say too about I need to know about. I'll have to follow up with you on direct pay and nonprofits. But then just following up on, I think we can stand on our own. I think, though, what I would say is that we are still in early adopter phase. And if we believe in the bigger cause, right? Like, I'm not here to deploy solar energy just because that's how I want to pay my mortgage or put my kids through college. I do it because clean energy is a better way, right? And so just less clean energy going onto the grid is annoying for the bigger why. And that is for sure. And so so we have to keep going. And then another conversation that I keep thinking about too is, and I listen to on other business podcasts about other forms of manufacturing is what are we really going to do, right, in America on manufacturing, and how much are we really going to onshore in all different sectors? And, in the conversation of just, are we really going to have a renaissance of manufacturing? Is that really where we want to go? And how do we balance trade policy, and how do we balance onshoring the specific type of manufacturing that we really want to do here versus others that other countries and other regions are just better at today. So,
Yeah.
It definitely stifles our ability to get there. And it slows us down and it makes us take a step back. But how far back? And then furthermore, how farther do we want to go as an industry or as a country to onshore manufacturing based upon labor, abilities, rules, raw materials, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's definitely soul searching as a nation, and sort of placing our bets and our investments in the right places, right? And I think that it is less about the handouts or the subsidies and more about true investment in capability. If we want to play in the global manufacturing stage, we at least have to be able to manufacture at scale at market price in our own country. And we know right now in solar that our market price is massively higher than the rest of the globe. And there's all kinds of reasons why, but we struggle with standing up new manufacturing capability, even at our inflated market pricing here today. So I think that's evidence that we're not ready to compete there. So how do we get ready? That's your question, right? Is this something that we really believe in as a country, as a government, that we should be investing in manufacturing? Or are we better off in saying, here's the things that we really should be focused on, and we bring in those imports? And that's where you have, it gets tough with interpretations of trade policy, what's best for the country. So 100%. I actually think with this change in the incentives, and the foreign entities of concern tied to the incentives, but not tied to, they're just simply not allowed to exist in this country. We do have an interesting case where if you're going to rely on federal funding, you have this high bar that has to be met with American products and no profits or investments or whatever going back to China, Russia, North Korea, whatever the full list is. And if you say, I don't need federal money, I'm just going to use private money, whether it's a loan, a credit union, a bank, or my own cash, I want good quality product. And I am free to buy that good quality product from anybody who is allowed to import it and sell it in the US. And that's probably going to be at a much lower cost stack. So unless we as a country decide we want to write policy that doesn't allow for that bifurcation of the market, I actually think there's a model here where we import product at a low price and a low cost stack and a really attractive offer through cash and loan to business owners or building owners, homeowners. That's that model. Then this other model that is locked into federal funding has a different price point and a different expectation, and probably right now is capped at a certain capacity. But we haven't, as an industry, come to terms with that. We're still thinking we're all like, my favorite analogy of our industry is a 9-year-old soccer team. We're all clustering around the ball and we're all trying to do the same thing all over the place. You shared it at the beginning. Not everyone is doing that. Some folks, like American, are working your part of the field and saying, this is what matters to me, and I'm ready. I got the ball, and I'm going to go over here and create some value for my customers.
Yeah.
And I think
you brought up an interestingly,
statement. there's a good way actually to align to that and avoid all the noise and all the heartache and all the constraint and all the rules and hurdles to jump through. Let someone else do that.
Yeah. I try to not listen to a lot of energy podcasts because I'm so afraid of being the 9-year-old soccer team and just following everyone else. I'm like, I just have to think alone. But your statement of importing versus using US made, do you see any future issues that BayWa is going to have to contend with quality of product? Something that American has done very well, other than a few, outsiders, but is really deliver high quality product, thus allowing us to have a really good high quality customer experience, right? Like I put you in and I'm not talking to you for 12 to 15 years. And so that's why I have like a big service department now is because I'm 25 years old. And so I have folks that are ready for repowering and things and roofing and things like that. But if you start to, do you have any concerns about quality? And even, and I guess even saying it in another way, if it for some reason does have a lower quality because the pricing is lower, does that mean that we become more of a commodity? Like we invest in a new phone every 5 years or a new laptop every 5 years, that it's possible that solar could become more of like a kind of like, again, that more commodity, that it doesn't stay forever. It doesn't stay as long as maybe the first people who've come into it, like American, but the next version of it is going to be faster, easier, less expensive, but it doesn't stay for as long.
Yeah, I definitely have those concerns, and I don't know what the path forward is, but I look to other markets globally to see what that sort of race to commoditization is. And I think that in general, it has been done without a significant decrease in quality. I think it's just been a decrease in price and deployments. And I think that along with the lower equipment cost has also come some economies of scale and some efficiencies of labor and some other things that maybe were helped by culture, maybe they were helped by local laws or regional laws. But let's be honest, a 5 kW system installed in Europe is done in 4 hours and it costs like $1.25 a watt.
Yeah.
We're a long way from that, right? And that's not just because the equipment costs are lower. It's everything is more efficient and effective. So will we get to more of a commoditized market? I think it's inevitable. I think it's coming. We have done a lot to keep it at bay because of the U.S. policies demanding that we do not have any product that comes from the Xinjiang region of China, right? And the forced labor laws. That was a big step. And even though the European Union threatened to institute that, they never actually did, to my knowledge. We did, and it meant that there was some product that we were not allowing to come into the country. So that's one small example of things that we're sort of doing to delay that commoditization or the race to the bottom. We also all of the anti-dumping, anti-circumvention petitions and cases are kind of going after the same thing. Don't create a race to the bottom for our market. We don't want that because we believe the inevitability of that race to the bottom is inferior goods, right? Yeah. So the people that are proponents of it, whether you believe in the petition vehicle or not, the goal of that is to keep quality high, right? And have some standards. So there's other ways we could do that, but to your point, Joy, I think as an industry, we do need to link arms. We need to compare notes. We need to investigate these companies that come to the U.S. and say, we comply all the laws of U.S. trade policy, and we want to introduce our product. But then we have to have a healthy dose of skepticism and say, okay, you're telling me you're half the cost of the current competition. Why is that? Right. I'm not sure I believe that's possible. So let's dig in. Let's investigate that, right? And we shouldn't be signing up those manufacturer partners as true partners without a thorough vetting. We should be looking at and taking a critical eye. And if we say, look, wow, you actually innovated, you created real value here, you did it with a lower cost than anyone else, you're a disruptor. Maybe we want to bring you in and give you access to this market. But now we got a problem for our other trusted partners. We're going to have to be honest about that and say, look, you got a new competitor and these guys are really good. Right. And they've been quietly working in the dark and we didn't know about them, but they were offering a 30-year warranty when yours is 15. What are you going to do about that?
Right.
Right. We have to be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. And I think about those things too, because even, even the warranty periods, just because they say they are, the RMA process on modules is so convoluted and so complicated and honestly so annoying for a small business like mine. That's why I'm curious of like, do we start commoditizing these things that have a higher failure rate and, cause my customers heartburn? I'm like, oh, yay, 25-year. But then if they, for some reason, have a hotspot or a brownout or some issue caused by the manufacturing, getting a hold of them and dealing with that RMA process costs the customer more money than it's worth. And I'm not going to do it for free.
No, you
So
can't do it for free. And
yeah,
yeah,
so
there are,
that's why I'm curious on as
yeah.
we develop the next business model, what will that look like?
Yeah, we do
Because if
have
I
to
don't
think
have to
about
do an
that.
RMA on a module again, that would be great.
It would be great. Or if when you go to buy a module, you can count on the fact that it's going to be the same footprint, it's going to fit into the stringing, right? And that
Yeah,
doesn't, we already know that doesn't exist because the innovation is way too fast. And
right.
so what is the option there? Do we as a practice, like you build a new home, you leave 5 gallon buckets of paint in the garage for the homeowner to touch up? Do we leave
Right.
3 modules for at the home on every job? Probably
Right.
not, but right, we've got to come to terms with what's the right way to solve this. And just
Yeah.
because the company says it's a warranty, is it going to be around? Is it going to actually do what it needs to do when it comes time to claim the warranty?
Right.
Probably not.
Right.
We've already seen a lot of evidence where things are moving too fast, or companies had a great plan, but then the rules changed and they're out of business and it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a lot of, there's a whole nother podcast in there.
Yeah, there is for sure. Do I have any other questions? So then we don't know. I guess again, the guidance, we're just waiting on guidance. Do we think we'll have more, hopefully have more guidance before RE plus?
Definitely by RE plus, we'll have a lot of consensus interpretation. And I think that we definitely will know more about the impacts of these changes and what's really coming about. I think right now there's still a lot of speculation. There's some early fast movers trying to sort of capture market share or first right of refusal kind of a thing. A little bit of game playing to sort of secure your place in line. We need for some of that dust to settle and then say, what's next? What do we need to do next? And to your point, what is left really up to debate or to interpretation? I think honestly, the rules are not that vague. It's just we have to take the time to say, okay, what does it mean for me in terms of that new business model? What do I know I want to do, and how soon do I start working on it? California, the shift from NEM 2 to NEM 3 was a really interesting one in the way businesses responded. Everyone knew what it was and what the date was. Some companies said, I'm not going to work on solving the future state until I have exhausted my sell through and I've created a backlog of 18 to 24 months of contracts under the old policy, because I just don't want to deal with that. So the choice they made as a business was sell, 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 sell. I create a backlog. And then once I'm working on installing that backlog, I'll figure out what to do under these new terms. So
How did that work out for them?
Mixed results, right? And I think it has to do with, like we said earlier, about if I take your money up front and I promise to do this work in the future, what am I doing to ensure that I still have that money to spend for you in that future?
Yeah.
I sold you this contract. This is the work I'm going to do and install. Do I know I can get the equipment still for that? Right? That was a risk. What are you doing to mitigate that risk? And then can you really do without new originations after the date of NEM 3? Can you actually stop selling for 18 months and be okay as a business? If you didn't think about how those signing new contracts and taking down payments from your customers was fueling your business, you probably got into trouble.
Right.
The flip side was people who said, I'm going to do a bit of both, right? Or I'm going to focus on the new solution and not build up a big backlog, but I'm going to be ready for that new condition. And I'm going to be the first one to talk to the homeowner and say, here's how you can leverage this new NEM requirement. And I've got the right offerings to put in front of you. And so,
yeah, so any installer that's never been through a NEM deadline type push, which I would assume there would be a lot of people who got dealt with like utility deadlines or something. But yeah, if you're not comfortable and you don't understand the during and the, like I was just in a breakout session with my team yesterday, and it was like, somebody had not gone through a deadline, and they're like, well, how do you market that? I'm like, bro, deadlines inevitably market themselves, right? Like,
right.
I'm not concerned about the next 6 months. I'm concerned about January 1st, right? Like, what are we going to do, right? And how are we at the kitchen table? And how are we going to be talking to our customers? And how are we going to market it? And I was already having this conversation, I believe, even with you, right when there was some rumors that this could happen, and how am I going to reframe that? So I've already started thinking about it, and quite honestly, I'm sick and tired of discussing a financial ROI at the table all of the time. Like,
Right.
I honestly can't believe the pigeonhole that we've placed ourselves in, of like, it literally has to be an ROI. And then I'm like, well, I've been doing this 25 years. I'm telling you, a 9-year payback period is outstanding.
Right.
And you should be really excited about that. If I know for sure that all you have to do is just buy a new inverter once, like, and when we put it on a brand new roof, like, I'm basically guaranteeing you power, because I know it's possible, because I've been doing it, for what is that, 16 years, guaranteed. Like, what the honky, like, we got to get this done. So I even moved away from the conversation of ROI in my team. I've taken all out of my pitch stack. It's just like, this is how much a utility rate is, and this is how much solar is. And we know that for sure it works. I joke and I'm like, well, when I came into the industry 16 years ago, 17 years ago, sure, like, okay, we were only doing it 10 years. Well, we've been doing it 25. It works. Stop acting like it don't. Your neighbors are doing it. Let's all do it. It's going to be fine. As utility rates increase, as AI is pushing on our utilities. I just read an article today of like, the cost of gas deployment is 3 times as expensive as it was back in 2020, right? So gas has gotten to deploy it 3 times more expensive just over a 5-year period. That is going to just do nasty things to the rates for our homeowners, and we have to be here to help them solve that problem. And the demand for energy. Now, I think I read another article this morning that says we have to be prepared for hundreds of days of blackouts over, a long period of time. But like, I don't want to be prepared for blackouts.
No, we definitely
that doesn't sound very fun. So
no.
How are we positioning ourselves again in our local communities, and, as a resource? And that has to continue to the day. This conversation has to maintain at the local level for us to keep going.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's the right wrap up here, right? Is that at the end of the day, it's about why are you in business? What value are you creating for your customer? And are you having that discussion and conversation face to face to listen to their needs and their concerns? And I think we did, as an industry, kind of move away from I'm interviewing you about your energy security and energy desires and goals. And maybe you don't know enough to think you have goals, but I bet you do. If I ask you a couple of specific questions, I think you can give me an honest assessment of how you feel about those. And instead we said, my job is to convince you to sign this contract.
Right.
We forgot to create value, right? We forgot to do something that actually is going to be a benefit for them. And at the end of the day, that model should win, right? Whether it's more enduring product or higher performance or more security, whatever it is, right? That should be the secret sauce. And we know that there are lots of ways to interrupt that, or, well, why not have repeat business every 5 years if I install equipment that's going to fail? Well, then you got to have a service model that supports that. And good luck with a customer that's willing to make that $30,000 investment every 5 years, right? That's not what other people are offering. So we don't think that's the right model.
Right.
So lots of conversation, lots of listening, and let's be honest about what business we want to be running and what it's going to take to get there. I think the only piece we didn't touch on was, with all of this policy change, is there a need to diversify your business? And I think that is what every business owner needs to think about is, if I say, yes, I need to diversify, quantify it. How much do you need to diversify, and what can you handle? Don't take it all on, right? And you've shared a lot about your successes there with, make O&M and service a viable profit center for your business. If you don't know how to do that, hire someone that helps you know how to do that. Critically important. Plan for that long term. I'm going to be in business in 15 or 25 years, so I need to make sure I know how to do that. And then how many customers can I bring along with me? in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for repowering, I knew it 10 years ago that it was going to be a business, and I'm just, just so proud of my team for being able to stick with it and bring it in and be able to get it done. And then also the roofing standpoint of it too. A lot of our customers, when they re-roof, they're like, I don't want to put, those panels back up. Let's just, and now, right, they were 200-watt modules, and now we're at 400-watt modules. So now I'm able to install half the module quantity, and give them another 25 years. And that is truly what solar does. Like, once you have solar, you can't you can't even think about living without solar, right?
Absolutely.
And so it is an opportunity there. And now I am bringing in even electric, going back into doing electric panels because of, folks adding more energy capacity to their house, right? And working with Schneider and your team on that.
Yeah.
I'm doing solar powered attic fans, solar tubes. I'm really looking at how do I become even a stronger resource for the utilities to the homeowners on saving those electrons, right? Truly the fastest electron to the grid is the one you're saving.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not saying that I'm going to go out and do all these energy audits. At least that's not on my roadmap, but I can definitely be, cross promoting my company and making my company sticky with folks that are like, well, I can't afford solar. I'm like, okay, well, how about I do a solar tube in that one dark area that you keep having to turn a light on in, and it's a low investment, high return experience with my company, that hopefully in the future will turn into, hey, I need you to fix my roof, to, hey, I'm ready for solar, and increasing those conversations. So there is so much more as a solar industry we can do because we understand energy. Right. And I know companies that are listening to this and are, working with you and are similar to me. The one thing that I know my team understands is the technical side of it and how to look at a utility bill and figure out how to provide the highest value. And so how do we do that and other soft things that increase the lifestyle? I'm even looking at skylights and just like the energy efficiency from a 1990s skylight to a 2025 and just reflective and higher quality, less leaking, all of that, right? There's just so many more things that as an industry we can be doing for our companies to increase what we sell and what we provide, which makes us stickier, going to your statement, David, of just a higher level service company that they keep coming back to you. I mean, I have commercial clients that are like, hey, this is not roofing, but it's close to roofing. Can you look at this? It's like a seal between a joint of two buildings.
Yeah.
They've never done it. Nobody can answer this question for me. Would you guys mind doing it? Well, again, what do I know, right? As an engineer, company, yes, I will figure that out, right? I will work with my partners. I will figure out how to install it and I will get it done. And that just turns into and it's easy to install. But you have to be that nimble and ready to say yes to different opportunities that are in your wheelhouse, that provides that stickiness and that customer service and charge for it, right? I charged for figuring it out.
Absolutely. Not only did you charge for figuring it out, but then you got the benefit of that you don't have to pay referral fees or lead generation, right? It's built in. You're selling to the same customer 5 times. So much. Boy, talk about cost reduction for your soft costs. That's the secret sauce right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have about 15,000 customers in my sales force, and I think I can do about 6 to 7 million of just O&M a year.
Yeah.
And that's not even trying, right? Like I joke and say I could do it with me and a few of my guys that I've been working with for years, like out of my house. And so it is, if you set it up and as you're moving from a 25D and as you're building your business and you're building that longevity, and that it can be a company that keeps giving for sure. And that's what I've experienced. Again, it takes a while and you have to stick with it and you have to have good processes and good data collection. But if you had a few of those things and start today, if you didn't do it, you have to start today because in 5 years, it's amazing what it can turn into.
Absolutely. And that's probably the best time to spend now through the end of the year instead of worrying about should I safe harbor or should I sell the heck out of my pipeline? No, figure out your business. Like
Yeah.
that's going to be the enduring thing. So
Yeah.
that's an awesome takeaway from this
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Is yeah, thank you, Joy. Thank you, David. I really enjoyed taking a back seat at the end there and letting the experts talk it out. My big takeaway is that, yeah, tax credits may be temporary, but solar is forever. We've kind of carved ourselves out this awesome niche as like home and building energy experts, and there's so many ways to go from here. So, costs change, but the value is always going to be there. Any final thoughts from either of you before we close to our listeners?
My final thought would just be first, I do have full empathy for any solar installer who, is going through it and doesn't see their pathway out. I always am available to any CEO who is in it. I've been in it multiple times. And through grit and perseverance, like you can make it out. So definitely if it's something that you love and you want to keep doing and you just need a motivational bump, please reach out to me. I'm here for you. And then my second would just be my appreciation for BayWa. I've been with you for a number of years, and so I'm super appreciative of everything that you're committed to and committed to helping companies like mine grow and think through things differently. And if I ask questions, your team is there to help. And I just really do appreciate everything, David, you do and your team does to be a resource for me, because without you, I wouldn't be as secure in what tomorrow brings.
Awesome, Joy. I don't think I can say it any better. It's that partnership, the trust, the true collaboration, and the communication, so valuable. And I think we are part of a larger tribe, and I think we have to kind of come together as a tribe, share our knowledge, our best practices, and lean into that. I think that's the path through. So really appreciate that.
Yep. Thanks again, guys. And thank you all for listening and watching on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. This has been the Solar Tech Talk podcast. And thanks. We'll see you next time.